Hello and welcome to this tutorial. This is a kind of complete Blender beginner's guide to using Blender, specifically targeted towards concept art, but it's a pretty general tutorial, so it could kind of be used for anything, but with a focus on concept art. We're going to be going through some of the very basics of Blender. It's going to go from like kind of navigating the workspace and stuff like this, and then going all the way to kind of rendering something out of Blender. Everything hopefully is going to be very simple, but there's going to be a few steps, and I think it'd be a good idea to try to replicate the steps, not necessarily in real time with the video, but if you can, then that also makes sense. Everything's going to be in real time, nothing will be sped up, so you should be able to follow along. Okay, this is Blender, and just a little bit about Blender. Blender is a free and open source 3D software. In many ways, it's like other software like Maya, Houdini, Cinema 4D, Modo, all these other kinds of software. But Blender is a little bit special in that it's kind of trying to be all those softwares at once. Blender's philosophy really is to do anything 3D, essentially, which means that it's not necessarily the best at anything specific, but it's very good at doing a lot of different stuff, which actually ends up being really useful for people doing concept art or using it for more graphical work or something like that, because it has immense flexibility, and it's a very neat package, and it's all free, so that is quite amazing. Blender is typically downloaded from the blender.org website, but you can get it other places as well. Something very important before starting is that you gotta be using the default Blender hotkeys. The first time you open Blender, it will ask you if you want to use the industry standard, if you want to use the Blender hotkeys. Please use the Blender hotkeys. Just get used to them. It makes all other tutorials make way more sense, just because the hotkeys are like that. And the hotkeys are very well designed in Blender, but they're also very different from other software. But it's a very strong recommendation to use the Blender hotkeys. If you've accidentally, or if you've chosen the other ones, then you can change them by going up to Edit up here in the left corner, and then going to Preferences, and then inside of Interface here, not Interface, under Key Map here, then I think you can choose here. You can choose Blender, or you can use Industry Compatible. I just choose Blender. And then, just try resetting everything, etc. And then you can save the preferences, and then that's the hotkeys that you have and stuff like that. Okay, so that's a big part of it. Just make sure you have the default Blender kind of layout set up. Okay, I'm also just going to be turning something on very quickly here for the sake of you guys. And this is just something that allows me to display my hotkeys. So just ignore everything. So you can see that my hotkeys will kind of just appear down here as I'm moving stuff around. We're just going to make this a little bit bigger. This is not super relevant for what we're doing right now, but I think yeah, there we go. So now you can see the hotkeys. Okay, just gonna ignore that. Okay. Let's actually get started. So here we have Blender, and I just want to go over the viewport and the UI kind of quickly here. The main big view we have here in the middle is called the 3D view, basically. And that is where you build your scene, it's where you manipulate objects, it's where all the 3D is happening, essentially. Over here in the top right, we have the outliner. And the outliner is just a hierarchy of all the stuff you have in the scene. So if we click stuff like the light here, you see we got the light, click the cube here, we got the cube, click the camera, we got the camera. So all this stuff is kind of just a hierarchy of everything in the scene. Down here we have this thing called the properties panel. And the properties panel is the place that contains all the information about our entire scene, and it's kind of divided into two sections. You kind of have these top ones here from this red one, these ones. These here are all the global settings. These are stuff like the world, the scene, layers, render settings for rendering an image out and stuff like that. And then we have below this line kind of here, from this yellow thing, we got all the local settings. So this is information about the object itself. So if I click the cube here with left click, then you can see it has its information about where it is and stuff. And if I click the camera, you can see this information changes. Click the light here, this information changes. So all the stuff down here is relevant specifically to the object, where this stuff is kind of global, etc. Down here we have a timeline, which is relevant if you're doing any kind of animation or something time sensitive. We won't be using that right now, but that's just kind of how everything is placed. And that's kind of just what we need to know. To navigate in the scene here and start doing stuff, it's very simple. In Blender, if you want to select an object, you just hit left click, basically. Like kind of in any other software, you can left click and then select something. If you want to deselect something, you can just click into empty space, or you can press double A. Yeah, if you press double A, then everything also gets deselected, but it also selects everything. But yeah, pressing A will also select everything, and then double tapping A will deselect everything. But you can always just click into empty space. If you want to move around and navigate in the scene, you know, looking around, then there's a few things to do there. So the first thing is that we can use the middle mouse button. If I click down on the middle mouse button, and then I start moving my mouse from side to side, I'll start orbiting the scene like this, and I can look around everywhere, like so. If I want to zoom, then I can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. I can also hold Control and use the middle mouse button and drag in and out, and that will dolly zoom in and out. So it's more like a smooth zoom transition. And if I want to pan the view, then I hold down Shift and use middle mouse button, and then I go left and right. So this is different from orbiting. Orbiting is like this, middle mouse button, Shift middle mouse button is panning, and scroll wheel is zooming. And then there's the dolly zoom, which is Control middle mouse button. So everything is kind of revolving around the middle mouse button, you know, your scroll wheel, to really navigate the scene, and that's quite essential for using the navigation. So just think middle mouse button, and then there's a modifiers to the middle mouse button, which is Control, Shift, etc., and they let you do the different things. Okay. So that's actually how you would look around in the scene and start seeing stuff from different angles. The next thing is kind of how you would manipulate an object. Let's say I wanted to move this cube here somewhere else, or move this light somewhere else, or move this camera somewhere else. Now, if we just click on the cube here, right now it's in the middle of our scene, which we can see by this grid. It's in the middle of our scene, and if we jump over to the properties panel and we click on this yellow icon here, we're gonna see this top tab here is called transform, and it contains a few different pieces of information. It contains something called location, something called rotation, and something called scale. Now these are the different 3D properties of our object, right? So our cube here, we can move it by checking the location X, Y, see here, and we can just start changing these values. I'm gonna drag on this value here, and we can see it beginning to move along the X-axis there. We could also make it move along the Y-axis, and we could make it move along the Z-axis, right? And we also have rotation values, and that's the rotation of the cube. And we could do the same thing here, where we modify these ones. They rotate on Y, rotate on Z, and we're getting all these different translations. And we can also do this with scale. You can see it's scaling here, this cube, etc. Right? I'm just gonna hit Alt R to reset the rotation, Alt S to reset the scale, and Alt G to reset the location. And all that does is just nullify all the changes we've made here, essentially just setting them to 0. Right? I'll just do that again here. I'll move the cube along Y, and then I'll hit Alt G, and you can see that sets it back to 0. All right, so that's kind of the relationship between the cube and these values here. Now, it is a lot slower to change the values by hand over here than changing them in here. So luckily there are some hotkeys associated with that, and those are the ones you primarily focus on. It's just so you understand the relationship between the two. So the way to actually manipulate something in Blender is we want to control these different values with different hotkeys. And the Blender hotkey stuff is kind of nicely laid out in a way where the shortcuts make sense with what you're doing. So if I just click my cube here and I want to move it, then I'm going to use G. And G essentially just stands for grab. And that will make sense once you press G. So if I press G now, then I just press G, I'm not touching the mouse. Then I'll grab the mouse and then I'll start moving the mouse around. And you can see that the cube is just following the mouse kind of relative to how we're seeing stuff, right? And that's, so now I've essentially grabbed the cube, and that's why it's on G. And then I can move it somewhere, and then if I click left click, you kind of confirm that move, you know, that translation of the cube itself, right? It now has a new location, and we can orbit around and we can see that, right? And if I do that again here, press G, it's attached to the mouse, and then I can move the cube. You can also see it doesn't matter where the mouse is. It's not like I have to be over the cube to make it follow. As long as the cube is selected, I could move my mouse over here, then press G, and then I can move it, right? Etc. If you're moving your cube and you're regretting that wanting to move it at all, and you want to just set it back to what it was, instead of left clicking, you can click right click. Right click will just reset it to what it was last here. Okay, so that's moving the cube, but we want to be a little bit more precise about how we move the cube. And in order to do that, we want to control these different axes, the X, Y, and the Z. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to press G. So now it's following. And then instead of just moving it, we're going to press something else immediately after. And we're going to press X. And that's going to highlight this X-axis here. And it means that now the cube is moving along the X-axis only. And we have a little bit of that control to move it exactly where we want here. And then I can press left click to confirm that move. Right. And the same works with the other axes. So we press G. And then let's say we want to move it along the Y-axis, and that is this one here. Then now I can move it along like this, and then I can left click to confirm, etc. And I can press G again and press Z, and then I can move it up and down. Essentially, that's what's going on here, right? You can also press G and then X, and then if you regret using X, then you can press Y. Then you get then it switches to the Y, you know, so you can always change your mind mid action, basically, etc., etc. Okay, so that's moving the cube with X, Y, and Z, etc. I'm gonna reset it on Alt G here, and we can do exactly the same stuff with rotation and scale. With rotation and scale, it's even easier with the hotkeys. So instead of pressing G, we're gonna press R. And now we're in this kind of rotation mode, and you can see we're rotating it, but then we can use the same axis again. We can say Y, and now we're rotating around the Y axis, and then we can left click to confirm that rotation. I'm just going to press Alt R to undo that, right? Press R again here, rotate around Z, press the Z axis, and now I can rotate around that, etc. And you can see kind of, if I'm getting closer to the cube, tiny movement of my mouse will kind of create these big swings, but if I drag my mouse out, I can have a little bit more sensitivity with how it's rotating. So this is kind of like handy control by just adjusting where your mouse is relative to the cube. Okay, I'm gonna Alt R that, and then we have the same thing for scale. So G for grab and move, R for rotate, then scale must be on S. Right? So we press S here, now we can scale it. And you can see by default it just scales it uniformly, so it just means it scales it evenly on all axes. But you can obviously change that if you switch to Y here, then we're just scaling it here, X just scaling it there, Z just scaling it there. I'm just gonna right click to undo that. So that's the way we would scale stuff, you know? And then you could use that to start moving stuff around here. So I could press G, then Y, then move that over, then maybe scaling it up here, press S, scaling that up, etc. Press G, Z, maybe aligning it with the bottom here, maybe looking around to see if the bottom kind of aligns. And now we kind of have the cube resting on the bottom there. The same goes for the other objects, right? I can move this light here. It's exactly the same way. Rotation doesn't really work on this specific light, and scale doesn't really work on it either. It'll get the values, but it doesn't change anything on the thing. For the camera, we can do the same thing here, moving it. I can rotate it. I can also scale it. It doesn't really have an effect on the camera, scaling it, but it can be done, etc. Okay, cool. That's kind of the very basic navigation of Blender here. So like we know how to look around the scene, and we know how to manipulate objects, etc. And there's some more advanced ways of manipulating objects, and we will look at that a little bit later. Okay, now we have a few objects. Now we actually want to start making something, and the way we're going to go about that is we're going to add a few more objects to our scene. So in order to add an object to a scene in Blender, you'll come up to this menu here called Add up here, and the Add menu has a bunch of stuff that you can add. You could add a camera, you can add a light, you can add metaballs, what even that is, you can add curves, but specifically you can add meshes, right? And meshes, you have a few things to kind of start from. You could, for example, add another cube, and the cube will just kind of position itself right there. And now we have a new cube, and we can manipulate that one and move it around, etc. We can also add stuff like a plane. Then we have a plane here. We can scale that up, etc., 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 etc. But something I want you to notice here when we go to the Add menu is that instead of like clicking on it, if I just hover over it, then you can see a little shortcut appears. And this is a universal thing in Blender. Typically when you hover over something, you'll see what shortcut is associated with that thing, if there's a shortcut for it. It's not everything that has, but if something has it, you can just explore it like that. And that means that we can click Shift A instead of clicking on this thing, and we would get the same menu. So we're going to try that here. We're going to go into the center of the screen, and we're going to hit Shift A. And now we get this menu. And then we can create exactly the same things. We could also create a sphere here, for example. So now we have a sphere there, etc. And if you're ever losing track of your objects, then you can reference the outliner. Especially if you're creating a new object or something like that, then maybe it's easier to see where it is through the outliner, etc. Okay, so that's kind of adding additional objects to our scene here. Now, we wanna start making stuff not just out of cubes and spheres. We want to actually model something. We want to make something a little bit more specific, right? And the way we're gonna do that is that we are gonna modify the basic components of these models, right? So both the sphere and the cube and the plane, they're all made of these things called vertices, edges, and faces, which are these base components like corners, the faces, and an edge, and that kind of stuff. And in order to manipulate those things, we will have to go into a different mode. Right now we're in this mode called object mode, where we can manipulate the objects, but we can't really change the structure of these things. If we come up to the left corner here, you can see that right now this 3D view is set to object mode. But if I change this thing here, we have a bunch of other ones that we can choose from, and one of them is edit mode, right? And there's all these other modes. We will not be looking at those right now, but specifically edit mode is very handy. We're gonna click it, and you can see now we're going into this different mode where suddenly we have access to all these vertices, etc. Right? So there's a vertice here. We can click those things, and then we have these faces. In order to select between vertices, edges, and faces, we can come up here to the top left here. You can see we have vertices, edges, and faces, right? And edges allow us to click an edge. Faces allow us to click a face, and vertices allow us to click a vertice, right? And the hotkey for those three things are 1, 2, and 3. 3 for faces, 2 for edges, and 1 for vertice. Kind of makes sense. So this is edit mode, and edit mode is kind of a per object thing. So you can see right now I can just select stuff here. I can't select stuff over here by the cube. So I'm going to go back to object mode, but instead of clicking up here, I'm actually just going to hit tab on the keyboard, and tab will just by default jump between edit mode and object mode because it's so used in Blender. So by clicking tab, you can kind of just jump between edit mode and object mode between one object here, right? If I click a different object, I can press tab on that one, and now I'm in edit mode for this specific object. You can also have two objects by selecting one object and shift selecting the other object, and then pressing tab. Now we can manipulate vertices in both if you would want to do that. I think most commonly you just manipulate stuff in one. I'm going to select just the cube here. I can click tab to go into edit mode again, and then we have the different stuff. Now we can manipulate the different stuff exactly the same way we're manipulating objects. So I'm going to press G, and you can see I can start moving this thing around right here. And I can again use the axes in the same way, X, Y, and Z. That should all be good and fine. I'm going to right click to undo. Then I'll click 2. Now I have access to an edge here, and I can manipulate that one. I can scale it, I can rotate it, all those kind of things. If I hit 3, now I have access to the faces. I can click a face, I can scale it, rotate it, all those things, etc., etc. So it works exactly the same way, but you just have a little bit more control. I'm just going to undo here on Control Z. So now we know how to kind of manipulate these things, but then we could do some additional things to the cube here. We could, for example, start building out a little bit of more geometry, right? And one of the really basic functions of Blender or of modeling in general is extruding additional geometry. And the way we do that is using E for extrude. So when we're here in edit mode, we can click E, and then you can see we get this automatic line here. And if I just start pulling out this thing here, we get this extrusion that's kind of linked to the mouse. And then if I left click, we confirm that extrusion. And I could click somewhere else, and then I can press E, and then extrude upwards there. And now I'm starting to actually build something, right? If you want to add maybe more detail and resolution to the mesh, then there's this really handy feature called loop cuts. Loop cuts you can activate on Control R. Control R will kind of, as you start moving your mouse around, you'll see these loop cuts kind of arriving. And if you click, for example, here in the middle, then we're going to get this thing again here. And then I'm just going to right click to just put it in the middle there. And then now I have these extra resolution that I can use. I'm going to go to 1 here, to vertices that I can use to start manipulating it and getting a little bit more of a different shape than I would have otherwise if I didn't have that extra resolution, right? So that's kind of loop cut and extrude here. I'm just going to undo. We could also say that, you know what, I would like a little bit more of a rounder edge right here. Then you have something called bevel. If I press 2, so I'm in edge mode, then I can select edges here. I'm going to shift select these two edges so that they're both selected. And then I'm going to press Control B for bevel, Control B. And now I can kind of bevel an edge like this, you know, etc. You could also create the same kind of thing by using the loop cut thing. If we do something like this here, now I created a loop cut, then I could just select these two here, and you kind of get the same effect. But bevel, you know, it's a little bit faster, and you can do it by, if I select this edge here, this edge, this edge, this edge, and this edge, I can also hit Control B, and then we get this kind of a thing and this kind of a rounding effect on everything. So bevel is just quite handy in that way. I just accidentally jumped out of edit mode. I'm going to jump back in on tab. But if you try to bevel this edge here, for example, press Control B, beveling, And if you want a little bit more resolution, then you can start scrolling on your scroll wheel, and then you're gonna get kind of more of a rounding effect on that bevel right there. And I'm gonna left click, and then now that is confirmed here. And we can do the same thing with our loop cuts. If I put my loop cuts here, you can see right now the loop cuts are not wrapping all the way around. That's because the geometry is starting to not be as clean. But if we have a loop cut here, we can still put in a loop cut like this, and then we can put it here, etc. But I'm just going to undo that, and I'm going to try doing a loop cut again. And then now I'm going to do the same thing with the bevel. I'm going to scroll my scroll wheel, and you can see that more loop cuts kind of appear. And then I can place those. I'm going to use right click here, and then we have all those. We have all this extra resolution. So that's kind of the very basics of modeling, and a lot of the features of the modeling are also present over here in the toolbars. I think for the most part the toolbar is not very necessary. I would definitely just look more into how you can access some of these things from the shortcuts. This is more for like very simple use, and I don't think you will be needing these a lot. There's a few times where they can be handy, but most of the times I find that that the shortcuts are the way to go, right? But you do have something like an extrude region thing here, but it works differently, where you click something and then you extrude it like so instead, and you have these gizmos. But I can for sure tell you that just pressing E and then using the hotkeys is a lot easier. But the toolbar can also be kind of essential when if you accidentally switch to something else. You often want to come back to this top one here, which is just normal selection. You can kind of see that once I've done this, then I don't have normal selection anymore. So you want to come back to just selection like this here, right? Etc. 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 I'm going to go back to object mode here for a second, and I just want to show you a few more of the selection features here. Selection in Blender, obviously we can shift select stuff like this, but you can also box select stuff by just clicking down and then just dragging like this. Then we're kind of selecting a whole bunch of things, and then we can press G, then we're moving everything at once, etc. But if I click on the select box up here, if I just hold down, you can see there's a few different versions of the selection tool. There's also this like lasso select, where you can select stuff like this if you need to, which can be kind of handy sometimes. I definitely most often just use the select box tool, but you can kind of cycle between them by pressing W. Then you cycle, and sometimes it just happens by accident, but just keep it on the select box as much as possible. I think that is the most kind of universal behavior for Blender. Okay, so now we're kind of getting into modeling and stuff like this. And I want to show you one other thing before we kind of move on. I'm going to click this sphere here, and then I'm going to go into edit mode on tab, and then I'm going to go into face mode on 3, select the face, and then I want to move that one. Now I would love to have this effect where if I move the sphere, it doesn't create this like really jagged thing. I kind of want to create this like squishy bean-like shape. And in order to do that, I'm going to be using something called soft selection. Soft selection exists up here on this little button right here. It's actually called proportional editing in Blender, but I know it as soft selection. So if you click this little proportional editing thing, then you can see if I now start moving, so I'm going to press G on this face. If I start moving, you can see this ring appears, and everything around this selected face now is kind of moving softly with it, right? I'm just going to undo that. And if I press G here, then you can see that's kind of the area of effect. But then if I scroll the scroll wheel, you can see it changes the size of this affected area. It's quite magical and squishy now, and behaves totally differently. You can also use that for rotation, etc., etc., etc. And then if we turn it off, it just behaves more normally, etc., right? The hotkey for the specific proportional editing thing, we can see by hovering over it, and the shortcut is O. So if we just press O, you can see it highlights in blue. O, it's off. Then O, it's on. And now we can use it. We can press, and then you can click it like that, right? I can press O, and then I can start manipulating it. O, do it like that, etc. So you just have a little bit more flexibility with how to manipulate something like that using proportional editing. Okay, very nice. I'm gonna go back to object mode, and I'm actually gonna take all of these objects here, and then I'm gonna delete them. And deleting is actually something that's kind of interesting in Blender because it's a little bit different sometimes. So I'm gonna press X for delete. Instead of you can also use the delete key on your keyboard, but X is shorthand for it. So press X here, and then it's asking you to say OK to delete. You kind of have to double confirm. And that can be a little bit weird, but there's plenty of reason for why it's actually doing it this way with the double confirm, and it relates to other aspects of Blender, which will make more sense as you're using the software. But for now, what you want to know is just that when you press delete, you're gonna have to double confirm, and you just have to click with your mouse button. And it's clever enough where it knows exactly where you've been and you want to click. So you can see every time I press X, it's going to appear right underneath my mouse. So something you'll develop is just this idea of pressing X, and then you'll just immediately click, mouse click, and then it'll be there. You can also just press X again, I think. Nope. Okay, that's different. So you can just press X and then mouse click to kind of confirm that thing. So it's kind of a two-step process to deleting something. It's just something you'll have to get used to, but there's other areas of Blender where this like double confirmation makes a lot of sense, which will make sense eventually. Okay, so I'm gonna delete all these things here in the scene, etc., 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 and I want to start creating just a little bit of a simple scene. And the thing I want to make is I just want to make a very, very simple castle here. And in order to make this castle, we are going to be using a few different features of Blender, specifically something called modifiers. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to use Shift-A to create a cube. No, actually we're going to create a plane. We're going to create a plane like this, and we're going to scale it up. I'm just going to scale it up so I have a little bit of a bigger thing. And that's it's going to be our hill to stand on. But right now we don't really have a hill, we just have a flat surface. So we kind of want to use that soft selection. So I'm going to go into edit mode here, and then I'm going to start trying to move this with soft selection. But we don't really have any resolution on the mesh to modify stuff with. So we need to give this some more resolution quite quickly. And there's several ways of doing it in Blender, but I want to show you how to do it through modifiers. So I'm gonna tab out of this. So now I'm back in object mode, and then I'm gonna come over to this little panel here, to the properties panel, and there's this little tab called modifiers. And modifiers are these special kind of tools to procedurally affect something. It's almost like a blending mode in a bizarre way. I'm gonna go over here and say add modifier, and then here we can search for the modifier that we want, but specifically we want to go into this tab here called I think it's under generate, under generate, and then down here there's this thing called subdivision surface. Just click that one, and now we have this thing where you can see it kind of rounds it out here, and that's not really the effect we want right now. We just want to add resolution to our thing. So I'm going to click on simple instead, and it kind of looks like nothing has happened. But if I come up here to the top here and click wireframe, viewport shading wireframe, you can see that we're not seeing any difference right now. But then if I just click off optimal display, you can see this actually has added extra additional geometry to the middle here. And if I come over here and I change these numbers, if I press 2, you can see it gives me more resolution. If I go higher up, more resolution, higher up, more resolution, higher up, more resolution, and higher up, so on and so forth. And we can add resolution to our plane quite simply like this. If I was choosing the other model here instead, Catmull Clark, you can see it gives it this rounding effect. And that's useful for some things, but we don't really want that right now. We just want this simple subdivision, etc. I'm going to come back to this solid view thing up here. We're going to talk more about these ones later here. You just want to be on that one for now. So, but you can see that this modifier thing here, it's something that's being added on top of the mesh, and that means that if we go into edit mode, we're not seeing those subdivisions, right? We don't have access to more stuff to manipulate. We still just have our 4 faces here. So it's kind of happening after the edits we make on the default plane. But if we go ahead over in the modifier here, we go to this little tab here and we say apply, then that gets baked into the mesh. And now if we go into the edit mode, you can see we have all this new resolution to start manipulating, right? So we can now grab a vertex here and press G, and then we can use our soft selection, like a proportional editing here, to do this kind of stuff, right? So that's kind of what the modifiers can partly do, is that they can do these fast procedural effects. So I'll click over here somewhere and I'll just drag up with set to create a little bit of a hill, maybe something like that. Do it over here. Just creating a little bit of a hill for our castle to stand on, etc., etc., something like that. Okay, just a little bit of a hill here. Gonna go back to object mode. Okay, so this is kind of our foundation for our castle. But something you might notice is that we have all these soft transitions, but we're still getting these kind of like blotchy squares and stuff, and that has to do with how Blender tries to kind of render the faces, but you can make it appear soft even though there isn't that much resolution. The way to do that is just right-clicking and then setting it to shade smooth, where the default is shade flat, right? Shade smooth, shade flat, shade smooth. Okay, and it just gives it this softer kind of feel here. Okay, now we have our little hill here. Then we are going to be creating a little castle base here, and I want to create a castle with kind of 4 towers around it. So I'm going to start off by going to cube here, etc. So I create a new cube. I'm going to bring that up here, and then I'm going to scale this to roughly kind of the size that I want. I'm going to scale this in, etc. Something like that. I'll take another cube. So what I'll do here is just duplicating the cube I already have by hitting Shift D, and then moving that out. And then I'll scale this one in here. I think I'll reset it to the center of the screen here. So I'll press Alt G, and then I can start moving that out here. I'll scale that. But right now you can see I'm scaling it uniformly. What I would like to do is to be able to scale it just along the Y and the X axis, and then just ignoring the Z axis. The way I'm going to do that is by hitting S, and then instead of hitting X, Y, or Z for the axis, I'm going to hit Shift Z. Shift Z makes it exclude the one of the axes, specifically the one you're targeting, right? So I'm saying Shift S, Shift Z, and that excludes Z from the scale. So you can see it has this more, the scale that just goes in 2 directions. And I can move that down, and then I'm kind of creating a little bit of a platform here. I'm going to hit Shift D, and then X, and then I'm going to bring out another cube here. I'm going to create a little bit of a, I don't know, something like this. Then I think this is a little bit too long. I could scale it, but I'm actually going to edit it. So I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to hit 3. I'm going to select that face there, press G, then X, and then moving that inwards towards the surface there. Okay, and I kind of have a little bit of a beginning here. Now what I really want to do is I want to create some towers around this this little castle here. So I'm going to create another cube, Shift A, cube here. Then I'm going to bring that cube up, and then I want to put that over here somewhere. So I'm going to just put that there, try to get that to kind of fit in, use that feature from before, as move, etc. Something like that. I'm going to go into edit mode, and here I can start just doing a little bit of modeling. So I can create something like that, maybe something like that, maybe bringing in this here, scaling that out a little bit, and then making a little bit of a tower like so. And I can also bring that in. So then I kind of just have a little bit of a tower like that. Now I would like to have this tower be duplicated to the other sides, and I could just take it and then duplicate it and then try to place it over there, but that's not really the Blender way. we want to use modifiers instead. So I'm going to click the tower, come over to modifiers, and click add modifier. And this add modifier here, we are going to go to generate again, and we're going to hit mirror. But instead of just clicking on it here, I'm actually going to, oh, that was an accident. I'm just going to click add modifier. I'm just going to click search, and then just search mirror. This is kind of the way you preferably want to find stuff in the modifiers tab. It's just faster than having to go through the menus, and you'll start to learn the names of them. So that'll work really well. And it might not look like anything is happening right now, but actually what's happening is that the mirror is duplicating everything inside of this thing in real time. So if I went into edit mode here on this one, and I selected everything by hitting A, and I started pressing G and X and moved this thing here, you can see that actually there's a duplicate mirror image of the other one here. And we can use that for some really interesting things. And it's being mirrored across this little origin point of the object. So every object has an origin point, and this one happens to be here. I'm just going to set Control Z. That's being mirrored across there. And we can use that to our advantage here. So I'm just going to go back to object mode. The mirror modifier is still on it, but I want to make it so that it doesn't mirror across this thing. I want to mirror it across this thing here. So I'm going to hit our little tower, and I'm going to set the mirror object. So I'm going to take this little eyedropper here and select this cube, and you can see now it mirrors across this central thing. So if I move the central thing, you can see that the tower scoots along like so. But this works for now. I'm going to click the tower again, and then I also wanted to mirror across the y-axis. So now we get these 4 towers like this. And the really cool thing about this is that now I can jump into our default tower by hitting a tab, go into edit mode, then I can click this face here, and then I can model this thing here, and it's going to affect it on all of them. And that's really the superpower of this thing right now, is that you can just make changes so fast. I'm also going to select all of these faces here. I'm going to hit, I'm just going to scale all these, bring these guys up, and then I can start doing something like that, maybe something like that, bring this down, etc. Maybe creating a little bit of a spire here, something pretty simple. And we could also use our bevel function. I could select this one, and that one. I could press Control B, and then we're going to get this kind of a feature here. Now you can't see though, now we can have this slightly uncomfortable transition between rounded faces and kind of square faces. If you're not really happy with that look, then what you can try doing is hitting right click, and then you can try doing shade smooth, but that will kind of smooth everything out like way too much. Instead, there's this happy medium in Blender called shade auto smooth. If we right click and we hit shade auto smooth instead, we're going to get this thing where it's kind of trying to maintain the sharp edges here and there, but it's not exactly sure how to do it. But we can modify the setting for the auto smooth a little bit to kind of decrease that threshold. If we come over to the green tab here called data for this specific object, then we come down to this tab called normals, and then you can see here it's set to auto smooth. We can take it off, it goes back to shade smooth. I'm gonna take it off on. Then you can see it's set to 30, but if we change this thing here to something like 45, you can see it's going to become more and more smooth as we're going along here. But if we decrease it to something like 15, then it's going to try smoothing out things a little bit differently. I'm going to try 25. You might be able to find a happy medium. So 20 seems to work pretty well for me right here. To still get that smoothness there, and this feels all right, but then maintaining the sharpness on these things, etc. So here we kind of have the beginnings of our castle. Now something I really want to make is I would like to make little crenulations, and crenulations are these kind of battlements that sit on the top of castles quite often for people to hide behind. And to do that, I want to create a little bit of a cube here. I'm going to create a cube, stretching it over here, putting it there, scaling it down to fit something like that. Maybe I'll even go into edit mode, hit 3, and then I'll create something like that. hit the edge here, bring that in, and then I have kind of a little battlement like that. I think also I hit R, Control R here, and then I'll double loop cut like this, enter, right click, and now I have that. Then I can select these two faces, and then I can extrude those upwards, and then I have something a little bit more defined. Proportionally it doesn't make too much sense, but this is more than fine for now. In order to put those all the way around these edges, it would be really great if I didn't have to do that manually by hand, by just duplicating and mirroring and stuff like that. Instead, what we're gonna do is that we are gonna grab the, go to the modifiers tab once more, and then we're gonna hit add modifier, and we're gonna search for a modifier called array. So ARRAY, array right there. And this one, you can see it starts making a duplicate of the object, but this thing you can just increase like so. And we can get lots of duplications like this. And this can be really, really handy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the axis of the kind of the array. Right now it's set to be 1 on the x factor. I'm going to set that to 0, and then instead set that to be on the y instead. So I'm going to set that to 1, and then we're starting to get this effect here. And I'm actually going to increase it a little bit more, so like 1.5, and then I can move this entire thing, and then I'm getting these kind of changes here. I'm going to decrease the amount here. Just want to place this somewhere in the middle where they kind of seem to add up, something like that. And now I have this awesome object, and now I can take this entire object and duplicate it to the other side, and then I could rotate this 180. Oh, so that's actually a feature I want to show you here. If I click an object and I have a very specific amount I need to rotate it by, I could come over here to the properties panel and then, you know, adjust the rotation here. I could just write in 180. But you can also do that in Blender itself. So if I press R, then I press Z, now I'm rotating around the Z here, then I could also start typing in a value instead. So I could just start typing 180, and you'll kind of see the number change up there in the left corner. It's going to be a little hard to see, but if I backspace here, you can see it's nothing. I could say 10, I could say 15, I could say 25, but specifically I want 180 to just rotate it 180 degrees around the thing. And now I have this thing over here, X, Y, G, move this thing. Now I got that battlement over there as well, etc. We could do it this way, or we could use another mirror modifier. So I'm just going to show you how I do that. So I'm going to delete this thing here, take this battlement here, then I'm going to go to modifiers, and we already have a modifier on it, but we can stack modifiers. So I'm going to go to add modifier, click search, and then find the mirror modifier here. And now we have mirror modifier on top of our array. And you can see it's already kind of doing something here, but we want to set the mirror object once again to be the central tower here. So we're gonna click the mirror object on that one, and then it perfectly fits itself over there, a complete mirror. And it'll also be great to have it on either of these sides, but the mirror is not really gonna do that with the Y here. That's not gonna work for us, so I'm gonna have to make a little bit of a duplicate, and then we're gonna take this and say R set 90, so we get the side here, and you can see that this new object here also has the modifiers. They're not the same modifiers. They're the same type of modifiers, but they're not linked in that sense. They just exist on this one here. So I press X, and then I can move this thing here in place. And I think we don't want the axis to be across the X-axis. We just want it to be across the Y. Or do we actually? Maybe we can do it like this. So we get this perfect symmetry, and then we can set it to Y as well. And then we get that kind of a thing. And now we actually have a little bit of battlements on our castle here. And I also want to show you just that the order of the modifiers do matter. So if I click on our battlements here, I could take my mirror and put it before the array, and you can see nothing really happens, because with this specific model nothing is it won't affect it. But if I take, I want to see if I can create a scenario where it's gonna matter. No, I'm just gonna undo that, sorry. Let's see here, mirror array. Yeah, so let me show you like this instead here. So on these towers here, we have a mirror modifier. I could add an array modifier, array like this. Now we're having these towers being duplicated over there. But if I put these before the mirror, you can see that the effect is different, and it's just, you just have to think about like what is happening in what order. I'm just gonna click on this little TV here, or the little screen on the mirror. That's gonna hide it for now. You can see that the array by itself is just doing this, and then when the mirror kicks in, it mirrors that, right? But if it was the other way around, if I put the mirror up first, you can see that I'm just gonna click the screen on the array here instead. You can see the mirror does this, then the array takes place by doing this. So the effect is different depending on the order of the modifiers. That's just an important thing to keep in mind, depending on the result that you want. Just gonna delete that. And now we have our castle on our little soft hill here. Awesome. I think already at this point, you have something very simple and essential that you can use in a very practical sense for concept art. So we have this thing here, and what we really have is just a really good perspective guide for doing our castle. So something really simple you can do is just grabbing this here. I'm gonna just take a screen cap here with Alt Windows and S, Alt Shift Windows S here. I'm just gonna grab this entire thing like that, and then I'm gonna go into Photoshop here and just paste that in. You know, then I have a nice little perspective guide, and I could just use this now to start drawing on top of everything, right? So I can start giving it details like windows, etc., and use it as a guide. Maybe it's broken here or something like that, right? And it's super handy, super useful for this kind of stuff, you know. And we can add whatever things we want to add to it that we feel like are easier to add maybe in 2D versus adding it in 3D, right? So that's just a really simple way of using this thing as a perspective reference, and then to just draw on top. You can also paint on top, all these kind of things. And that's kind of the basic mindset is basically that we can create something in 3D and then we can modify it in 2D if we really need to, for the areas where that becomes easier, etc., 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 right? So we start to have a little bit of a castle like that, which is super awesome. And that's kind of the power of Blender. But we have a few more things we want to go through and just show before you kind of have like a basic foundation of Blender. Okay, the next thing we want to look at is gonna be materials, right? Right now everything is just looking very gray, right? We really want to give this a little bit of color, and it's a really powerful part of Blender is this thing of adding materials and making everything look nice and poppy. Let's start off with this little hill here. We have all I want to do is I just want to make this green. So I'm going to click the hill, and then I'm going to come down to this area over here, the little red ball. And the red ball here, you can see it says material. If I click that, we're going to get a part of the properties panel that just shows us all the materials associated with this specific object here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit new right here. It's going to create a new material that sits on top of this object here. And here you can see there's just this property called base color and this white bar, and you can click the white bar and it becomes like a color selector here. And we can make this red. But you can see that nothing's really happening. We're not seeing that color. That's because in Blender we need to be in the right mode to actually view colors. The way we're in the solid mode right now, and solid mode is meant for just modeling and editing stuff. But if we jump right here to the next little viewport shading ball right here, we're going to get this mode that looks a little bit different, has a little bit more lighting, and we can now see our red color. The shortcut for switching between these things is holding set down, and then you're going to get this little pie menu. And the pie menu, you can then select the different ones. We can have solid view, we can have wireframe, and what you do is you just hover over a thing and then you just let go. So hover over wireframe, let go of set, hover over solid, let go, over material preview, let go, etc. And these different viewing modes, they allow you to see the scene in different ways. And what you need to know about them is that wireframe is kind of the mode where you can really see vertices and edges, and you can kind of get this very constructed look of everything. A solid view is kind of where you see just the form of everything. Material preview is kind of, it's what makes sense. It's just seeing the material, like a preview of the materials. Rendered is showing you what the scene actually looks like. And now you can see that our light is being kicked into gear here. And we'll get to the lighting right now, but just now you know that that's what that's for. We're going to jump back to material preview for now and concentrate on our materials. Okay, we got our material here on this grass here, and what I'm going to do is just to create a little bit of order, I'm going to just rename this material here. I'm going to call this one red material, like that. So now I can always find it later. But actually I want this to be grass, so let's change it to grass material. There we go, grass material. I'm going to change this to like a greenish color, maybe a little bit darker here, something a little bit of yellowy, like this. Now we have this nice little material here. Now the thing with materials in 3D software is that you have all these different properties beyond just color. You also have things like, is it metallic? You know, I can shift this and then it becomes more like it has this metallic quality. I'll put this down. Now it doesn't. Roughness, like how rough does this material feel versus how shiny. If I go all the way down, we get this plasticky, weird kind of foundation. If I go all the way up, we get this very matte, almost velvety feeling thing. I'm going to put it somewhere around 0.7 or 0.8 maybe to get this somewhat matte feeling for this hill for now. It's a good foundation at least. Then for the castle itself, I kind of want a more like beige color. So you can see on these ones here, we don't have material associated. It's just on this one. So I'm going to click the towers here, create a new material. I'm going to call this kind of sandstone maybe. I'm going to switch this color here, maybe give it something a little bit darker, a little bit something along those lines here. And that's super awesome. However, now we have this problem where I also want these guys to have the material, and we could just go to this object here and then go to this little drop down right next to the new, and we can say I want to use the sandstone because this lists all of our materials. You can also search here, sandstone, etc. And now that has the thing. And we can do the same thing for all of them. However, there's a little bit of a faster way of doing that. If we just select all the objects we want to have this material, then we can shift select all of them, and then I shift select this one in the very end. So now this one is kind of has like a yellow orange outline, with the other ones is like a little more of a reddish orange outline. That means that this is the last selection in the, or the active selection in the selection. And now I can click Control L, and Control L lets you link certain qualities of other things. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to link the materials to these other ones. So now they all get the material of the original towers, etc., and everything has this sandstone color. And if I now change the features of the sandstone on one tower, you can see it's going to change the qualities on them on everything here. It's at the metal, etc. So everything is going to be affected. They all share that one material, etc., etc. Very cool. And we're beginning to have a little bit of a castle here. I would also love to give the spires themselves a different material, but this is all one object, right? And we could do a few different things. We could also separate some objects. We could combine objects, etc., etc. But what I want to do is I actually want to specifically associate a material with just some faces, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into edit mode here, and this is our default tower. Then I want to select all these faces here, and the way I'm going to select the faces is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to jump into wireframe mode. I'm gonna hit set here, go to wireframe, and then we have kind of a look of edges and faces and stuff. You can see these little dots here. They kind of just represent the faces. And I want to just see this tower exactly from the side here. So I'm gonna hit Alt, middle mouse button, and then drag left and right. And it's gonna snap these views. And if you just drag normally, you're gonna be back. A hotkey or like a shortcut for that, or a different way of doing it, is by clicking these axes here. Like this, you can see them exactly from the side and the left, etc. And then here we can just start selecting something. I'm gonna box select everything like this. And you can see what that's done is that because we're in wireframe mode, it's seeing through everything, so therefore it's selecting everything. So everything you can see is what you can select here. I'm gonna go back to this mode here, and then I'm gonna shift drag select some of these things here. I don't want those guys right there, so I'm gonna control click. I'm gonna control drag on these ones here. Then they get removed, and I'm gonna control drag on those ones, control drag on those ones. So this is a little bit more kind of complicated, but it gives us some flexibility here. I'm gonna go back to solid mode. Just wanna select those two faces there. So now I've selected all of these faces, and then I'm gonna come over to the material tab again. Make sure we're on the material tab. I'm gonna hit this little plus sign, and the plus sign means we're gonna create another material slot on this model here. Plus there, and I'm gonna hit new, and now we create a new material on it, and I'm gonna hit assign. So assign means that it's gonna take whatever is currently selected and assign it to that slot, right? So if we jump over to the material preview again here, then you can see that now these faces here, they are white, where the other ones have the sandstone material. Right, so this new material, we're gonna call it roof, and then we're gonna make this like a coppery kind of color like this here, something along those lines. And we have a little neat kind of castle with kind of oxidized copper roofs here. So this is very cool. Okay, so that's kind of the foundation of materials. Something really important to know about materials is that what we're seeing out here is like 1% of it. When you actually modify and make and change materials in Blender, the way you handle it is you come over to this little workspace called the shading workspace. And the shading workspace is just a reorganization of all the windows in Blender. But you can see here that now the materials are actually nodes instead of just being stuff. And what's happening is that if I click my tower here, come down to the material thing, see all the settings we had right here with the green stuff. It's the same settings that is on this node here. And that's just represented over here kind of in preview, but actually most of the time you modify the stuff here. And you can see if I click the sandstone here, the node changes and stuff like that. And the reason why we have nodes is that it allows us to do a little bit more complicated things. So one of the things we could do is that we could bring in textures, for example, and I just want to show you quickly how you might do that and show the effect on these towers here. Okay, so I've gone ahead online and just found a little brick texture image. So it's just an image of some bricks, and then I want to kind of apply those bricks to. I want to use these bricks as the color for the sandstone. Instead of just this base color that we selected. So I'm going to take the file from my file browser over here, my downloads folder. I'm just going to drag that image file in. So I'm dragging the image file in here, poop, like this, etc. So now I have this image file as an image texture node. And then here you can see this little output called color. I can take that color output and use it for the base color instead of whatever I'm doing. And you can see everything looks a little bit weird. Everything's a little bit stretched, and that's fine for now. And there's all these ways that we can modify it, and it's tied to something called UVs, and it's a little bit more advanced. But for now, I just want to create that idea of the connection between an image texture and kind of the color, and that's kind of what we're using these nodes here. To just make it a little bit nicer looking for now, we are gonna just hit this node here, and then let's see here, we wanna press Shift A inside of this view here, and we're gonna have access to all these nodes here. And I'm just gonna search for one called texture coordinate, like this. And I'm just gonna set this to object instead of whatever the default thing is here. And then I'm gonna take this little spark here and just set that to the plane. I'm gonna set this to box instead of those kind of things, and it just looks a little bit more normal now. And we're not going to go into too much depth with this stuff right now. It's just so you understand that kind of behind the scenes, this is the kind of stuff we'll be doing to make the materials happen on our on an asset or something like that. Okay, so that's kind of a little bit there about materials. We're going to go back to layout here, which is our default view, and then we just have our castle again. And now actually I want to look at the lighting again. So if we come over to our little viewport shading here, then we get into rendered view here, right? And now we can actually see our lighting affecting our scene in real time. And we have a few different lights in Blender. So this by default here, this is just this kind of point light that just lights our scene like this. But we could also come to Shift A, then go down to light, and then create something like a sunlight. A sunlight is very cool because it's just this big directional light here. I'm going to take this point light and just delete it. We have this sunlight here instead, and that's just going to be this uniform light from one direction. I'm going to increase the strength of the sun, clicking the sun and then going to the light properties over here. I'm going to set this to something like 5 or something. Then we get this nice bright sun that we can use to light up our scene. Right now you can see that kind of like our shadows are kind of dark and grayish. If you want to change the shadow color, you kind of want to change the environment around the castle. And in Blender, the environment around everything is up here in this little red tab called the world, right? And you see the world, it's a little bit similar to the materials in a way. And behind the scenes, it is very similar. But I'm just going to change the color here for now to something like a little bit of a lighter blue or something, to get that kind of coloring in there. I'm gonna take the light here, go to the light options, and here for the sun we can also change the color to something like a red or something, or blue, or all these kind of things. We can really do what we want to do to begin building the mood and stuff for a castle here. We get these shadows. Now here's a really important part of Blender to keep in mind, and that is that because we're in a 3D software, we're going to have different ways of rendering something. And rendering just means that like we are generating an image of what we're seeing on the screen, and there's different ways of doing that. Right now we have this kind of gamey look where everything is not quite perfect. You can see the shadows are not perfect here. They start tearing a little bit here and there. And we don't have all these like subtleties of the light. But if we come over here to the top view here, called render, you can see we have a different render engine. And a render engine is just a different way of rendering something. By default, it's set to Eevee. But if we switch over to cycles, we're going to get something a little bit more powerful. Now, this, like how much you can actually render and what you can do in real time, will really depend on your specific hardware and those kinds of things. But I'm just going to hit cycles right here, and you can see that everything starts getting really noisy, but the lighting also becomes a lot more nuanced and stuff like that. And that's because it's actually calculating light rays bouncing around and trying to find little pockets of light and stuff like that. And now I can move the thing, and it's a lot slower to move around like this, but the lighting also looks a lot more accurate. And you can see if I grab a little point light, Shift A, little point light here, I'll drag the point light. It's going to be a little bit difficult to see, but it's in there somewhere. Dragging this out here, you can see I get this little light here. I can take this light and adjust it and set it to like a blue color instead. Maybe set it to like 500. Now we're getting this kind of a scenario going on here, right? And you can see if we go back to kind of our material, if we switch back to Eevee instead of cycles, I'm gonna switch back to Eevee here. You can see that it still kind of works, but we're not getting the same kind of gradients and nuances. It just doesn't look as real as some of the stuff going on here. We have this like nice bouncing of light in these corners here, and you can kind of see the effect here. I'll switch back to Eevee. See, it looks a little bit more dead in a different way, but it's still very serviceable. But cycles is more realistic. That's kind of the point here. Something also to keep note of is that when using something like cycles, it's either going to be using your CPU or your GPU on your computer. If you have a dedicated GPU in your computer, then you can switch to the GPU, but you might have to come up to Edit, Preferences, and then go to System, and then System here you'll say Cycles Render Devices, and then you can switch this to either CUDA or Optics. For the most part, Optics is going to be the right thing to choose. And you see it's going to list probably your graphics card here, and if you have multiple, you just select multiple. I have a GeForce RTX 3060 in my computer, and that's the one I want to use. So I'm gonna close that. Then I'm gonna come over to Device. I'm gonna set this to GPU, etc. So now it will be a little bit faster. You can see, for me, it's a little bit more responsive than when I'm using my CPU for rendering, etc. So that's a little bit about the lighting here. I'm just gonna delete the point light just to make the scene a little bit simpler, and then I just have this lighting thing here. And what I want to do now actually is that I want to render something out. We're kind of reaching the end of this tutorial. And the final thing we want to do is rendering out an image that we can then manipulate inside of Photoshop. And in order to do that, I want to use a camera here, right? And we have a camera already in our scene. And what we want to do is we want to place this camera somewhere where we can see our castle here. And let's just say that I have my camera here, then I can render out the image from this camera angle. And if I just say, go to render up here in the top, you can say it says render image and the hotkey is F12. So I'm just gonna hit that button there. And then I'm gonna let Blender just kind of render that out. And you can see it's beginning to render this out like so. And we're getting that angle, right? And we want something a little bit more interesting. And it'd be really nice if we could see specifically the angle that we are want to render from inside of Blender. So now it's done rendering here. This is our final image, and we could go to image, and we could save that image as a particular kind of image file or something like that. But let's just go back to Blender real quick and then focus on this. I'm gonna go over to Material Preview to just have this simpler look here. And then what I want to do is that I want to jump inside of the camera, in such a way that I'm actually looking through the camera, right? And to do that, you're going to press 0 on the numpad. So if you don't have a numpad on your computer, you would have to go to View, and then you have to go to Viewpoint, let's see here, Camera. Viewpoint camera, right? But I'm going to hit 0 on the numpad. And now I can actually see what that shot is showing me. And you can see as soon as I start moving around, we move out of the camera again here. But I can move the camera by pressing the camera and then pressing G and then X, and then I can move it like this, but it's not super handy. What actually would be really nice if that we could kind of look around like we were looking around in navigation. So I'm going to press N, and N is going to open this little tab over here. You can see there's a little tiny button right there. You can also click that one to open this panel. And the N panel just contains a bunch of extra information for assets, but specifically we want to be on the camera, and then we want to go to View. Then we want to click this button right here called Camera to View. If we do that, we're going to get this little red dotted line around the camera, and that means that it's now kind of active. And if we start navigating around here, you can see that the camera view is following what we're seeing here, and then we can start lining up our shot. Right. I just want to reset the rotation for my camera, so I'm going to come over to the Object Properties panel here. I'm just going to take all the rotation values and just hit 0. Right, so now it's completely re-rotated, so I'm not seeing anything. I think it's because the camera's looking down. I'm going to look around here. There we go. So there we got our camera, and then I can start moving around here a little bit. If you're having trouble with it like not responding that well, that's probably because of kind of where the view is set right now. The easiest fix is just to click on an object and then hit the little comma on your numpad next to 0 on the numpad. That kind of frames the view, which also is similar to this. Let's see here. It's called, it has a certain name. It's called something local view, I think. No, frame selector. There we go. So frame selector, you can also click that one. You can see it's the little numpad cover there. I just used the little comma next to the numpad, and now it's a little bit easier to move around. And then I can frame my shot, and if I want to see the lighting as I'm framing my shot, I can just jump over to rendered view, and then you see I'm seeing the lighting here. And if I find that all this kind of extra information on top is a little bit distracting, I can always click this one and that one, and that's gonna just hide everything, and then I can just see the shot for what it is. But I'm just gonna take it back so I can adjust my sun here. Gonna rotate my sun, maybe creating like a front-facing forward shadow, something like that. Take these things out here. Now, yeah, this looks pretty nice. This is kind of the shot I want. And I'm just gonna hit render. Right, I'm gonna hit render like this. And it's gonna start rendering out the shot. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that we're using cycles instead of Eevee to render it out. So it takes a little bit longer to render it to really get that fine detail of the shot. But what I'm gonna do instead here, I'm just gonna cancel the render for now. And then we're gonna come up to the render tab here. And I'm gonna adjust some of these settings. And the thing to know about cycles is that higher numbers means longer time, but also less kind of noise. And what I'm going to do here is that I'm actually going to set it way lower. I find that way lower is fine. And also this all depends on your hardware and your computer. I'm going to go into render and set it to 128. Also in the viewport, I'm also going to set it to 128. I like this. This is a little bit more advanced, like these kind of features here. But it will make sense over time. Just for now, just see if you can set these to 128, and you should probably be good. And then if we render, hopefully, I'll press F12 there for render. It'll go a little bit faster, and at least I am about to be done. Now I am done with the render. And now I have this image, and I can then go to image and say save as, and then I can save this as a cool picture here. I can set it as PNG or whatever. I'll just call it my castle, like that. But it could also be cool if we could kind of have a little bit more flexibility with this image. We could also render it out without the background. If we want to do the background in Photoshop, for example, then I can close this image here. I can, over in the render settings, I can come down to this little tab called film, and then I can turn on transparent. And you can see that's going to make the entire background transparent. And then if we render again, F12, then it's going to render it out with the transparent background. So I'm just going to let that finish rendering. There we go. Press image, save as, and then castle underscore no BG for background. I'm just going to save that image right there. Then I can come over to Photoshop, and then I can potentially find this file that we just exported, and I'm going to drag that over. You see, there I have it with a transparent background, so I can start doing stuff behind this castle, like creating little clouds or something like that, etc. I can also paint on top, right? So that's basically it. That's kind of the important thing here, is just understanding that entire workflow between Blender and Photoshop, right? We are building something up, then we're rendering it out, and then we bring it into Photoshop. And there's many different ways of doing it. And you can also just avoid bringing it into Photoshop to do the whole thing in 3D. But that establishing that idea of like you make something, you render it out, and you bring it into Photoshop. That's kind of the big essential thing here to really understand. So yeah, so that's pretty much it for the tutorial. Thanks for watching, and best of luck.